Welcome back to the 10x Contract Value Podcast, the show where contracts aren't paperwork, they're profit. I'm your host, Tyja Dickerson, and today we're diving into a bold question that many leaders are whispering behind closed doors. But we're saying it out loud. Has CLM failed to live up to the promise? And if so, what now? Because here's the reality. Executives have poured millions into CLM platforms expecting transformation, faster deals, better compliance, and stronger commercial performance. But for too many organizations, the return just hasn't shown up. Cycle times didn't drop, adoption has stalled, and worst of all, the intelligence inside contracts never made it to the business leaders who needed it the most. So, what's really going on? Today's guest knows Jim O'Hare is one of the most trusted minds in the CLM space, a strategist, an architect, and an implementer with more than 30 years of experience guiding Fortune 500 companies into extracting real value from their contracts. He's advised companies at IBM, Conga, Legalese, and today through OHC Systems and CLM Gurus, he helps organizations cut through the noise and build contract programs that actually work. With more than 400 enterprise CLM implementations under his belt, Jim brings the kind of perspective most vendors won't tell you and most leaders need to hear. In this episode, go beyond the buzzwords around CLM and talk about what it really takes to move contracts from legal overhead to commercial engines in today's AI-driven world. So let's get into it. So thank you for joining us today, Jim. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Taisha. And I'm really excited to be a part of this and looking forward to a conversation.
Yes, awesome. So what did I miss? Did I miss anything in your fabulous introduction? I know that you have a lot of time in this space, and I know that you are very passionate about the value that it brings to businesses. What did I miss?
You captured it pretty well. I have been in the CLM space for over 25 years. I've worked for 9 different CLM vendors. I really focused on the services side of it. So that's where the 400 projects, being a part of over 400 projects from the first company way back in 2000 that I started working with CLM all the way to now. Yes, but I think my focus as a services leader has really been how to get the most out of a tool like this through focusing on the organization and not just the tool itself. But I think that's my background. You did a great job introducing me, and glad to be here.
Awesome. So CLM has been in the market for a while, and I think that it became really pronounced when the pandemic kicked off in 2020, right? Then everything started, everyone's about having CLM. And now it's kind of, I saw in a Gartner report where it's kind of on the tail end, right, of the hype cycle, right? Why do you think, or is that the right place for CLM to be in the hype cycle? And why do you think that is today?
So I think that going back to the beginning, there was a lot of hype. So there's been kind of ups and downs with CLM over the last 25 plus years, what I found is that CLM tends to become more popular as problematic areas within the overall economy occur. COVID and the pandemic, we did a lot of business, my services group during the pandemic, because there were so many supply chain issues. There were so many contract issues and compliance issues trying to bring in things from other countries, things like that. So there was this upswing, right? And but every upswing has a flattening, and I find as new things are starting to come into the market, or vendors are pushing new things into the market, that sometimes has a reverse effect from exciting people and continuing the growth curve up. So yeah, I think that there is a flattening, and I do see a flattening of the excitement around CLM and what it can provide. But for me, it's an up and down, and it's been an up and down, throughout my years doing this.
Yes. Well, I appreciate you sharing that, because I in my mindset, there's definitely, we should be in an uptick with all of the tariff and the supply
Right,
chain uncertainty and the
right.
inflation. It seems like we're still kind of on that flattening, because I think people are still trying to get a feel for different strategies to leverage. So I wanted to get, if you had any thoughts around how contracts and these contract systems play a critical role in tariff strategies, inflation strategies, customer and supplier management.
Right, and so CLM tools are really good at identifying specific things that you ask them to focus on. So when it comes, during the pandemic, it was supply chain. So you could point the CLM system at things related to suppliers, and whether they were international or not. Now with the tariffs, that there are going to be changes to language within the structure of a contract, and there also are going to be changes to which suppliers are going to be used to provide goods and services that companies are looking for. So the wonderful part of CLM systems is their flexibility and their ability to adapt to change, given the right kind of guidance from people like me who understand how to how to kind of frame a CLM system so that it points to specific areas that are being driven by current economic and business environments.
Agreed. So with that, the upticks and the downticks, there's been some little noise going around that CLM is dead, right?
Right.
So I wanted to get your thoughts on it, seeing the upticks and the downticks. Is that quite normal for that sentiment to be there, or do you think that this is a phasing out of contract management as a critical component in the technology stack and process?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I am I'm going to be jumping on the CLM is dead bandwagon. I see it through a different lens than a lot of other people see it, and I know that the whole CLM is dead thing has been popping up on webinars, legal-based webinars, and legal groups have been throwing out chats and messages and LinkedIn and other places, and trying to understand is this really dead, and does CLM need to become something else? And I'm just not there. I think from the day I started in CLM, way back, the mission was to focus on the collection of contract information in a single place, look at metadata, look at the ability to find something quickly, and be able to adapt, based on the information that you access. And so as time moves on, everything starts to evolve. A quick aside: the first industry I worked in was project management. I worked with a competitor to Microsoft Project. And so project management software has gone through kind of a similar kind of journey. And they don't disappear. That they keep evolving into new and better things. So CLM, from my perspective, is not dying. It's simply evolving, to some extent, it's going back to its roots, right? I'm working with a number of clients right now where they understand that, okay, AI is not something that I want to look at right now. Right now, what I want is that benefit of being able to find something quickly. One particular customer, the reason they purchased CLM was a senior vice president needed a contract document urgently, and it took 3 days to find it in their organization. That's a reason to that's a reason to engage with CLM. And so I kind of smile at folks that feel that this industry is dead. I still think there are billions of dollars of opportunity out there over the next 5 years, and I think that it's a matter of it's not the product, it's the people who are helping you deploy the product. And and the features are there right now to be highly successful, and there are clients that are highly successful. So I don't think I agree with that too at all, really. So
Yeah, well, I'm definitely on your side of the fence, right? Because I think that many companies in their implementation of CLM in the past can get stuck in the front end on the workflows, right? How to harmonize your templates and how to get everything very perfect before going into the system. So it's the workflow, the optimization side of it. And I think that there's the missing part that can demonstrate value is the data side, right? So the contracts that are already live and signed, like what is the value that you've seen that those provide to companies when that data, like you mentioned, the contracts are centralized and now that data is available to the organization to quickly make decisions or integrate with other systems? I wanted to see what you had thoughts on that side of things.
Right. And a lot of it depends on what the customer chooses to do with all of that existing data, what we would call legacy data. And what's available to use, just immediately, and what data is there to be mined by possibly an AI system to extract more information. But there's just a wealth of data in legacy information. I mean, if you want to try to understand your cycle time and why contracts stall, the place to look are all the contracts that you've just worked on over the last 3 years, and the data is going to be there likely, and so I'm a big believer in trying to look at legacy data as a core part of your initial journey, and not like some other service providers that say, well, let's just put the CLM system in there and get you to start using it and moving forward with it, but forget the back end stuff for the time being, and don't worry about legacy data until like 6 months in the future or a year in the future. No. There's a ton of information sitting there. You want great dashboards, you want great notification systems, you want to understand how to make your process better. You're going to find a ton of that data in the contracts that you have. Now, in some cases, it's hard to get to that data, and you need people that are experienced in doing that and helping you do that. But I think that's a gold mine that people sometimes forget about and miss. But data's everything. Data is literally everything.
Agreed. My positioning is that contract data is tier 1 data critical to the business, right? So these are the terms you're actually operating under, right? Like up to 80% of your business transactions are governed by a contract. And right now, today, you can't see the expiration dates. You don't really know what's on the horizon. Do you have price adjustment clauses? When we kind of start talking about these tariffs, what protections do you have in your contracts? Do you know what force majeure clauses that you have? That's all data, right? And that's
Right,
all things that could be
right.
usable for the business. And I think on the other side, I wanted you to speak to it is now you have this data. Do you think that companies are positioned to really leverage that data, or do they bring in experts like yourself to say, okay, now that I have this data, what are the outcomes? What are the things that I can track? How can I use that data? Can you speak to that a little bit as well?
Yeah, and it's a really good point. Vendors, CLM vendors, like many other tools, there are areas where they're very strong at, and there are areas that they're not very strong at. And evaluating and analyzing data and coming up with answers or guidance based on that data is not one of the strong points of the CLM architecture that most vendors put out there. And that's why there are companies that specialize solely on taking CLM information and trying to provide analytics from it. But yeah, I guess my perspective on this, and I've done a number of these with a number of different clients, is once you have the right framework and configuration within the CLM system, you've made the decision on what you're going to do with your legacy data and the information you're getting from there. The next step is to transfer that information into a system like Tableau or one of the other kind of analytic tools, and we've done that multiple times, and that's where service providers' experience in what information is going to help make decisions. We're able to then say, here is a set of analytic data from your environment, and here are the areas you're going to be able to make decisions off of. Jim's team is consistently falling behind on processing amendments or processing new contracts, getting their NDAs signed before they actually start negotiating MSAs and SOWs. Things like that are crystal clear in the appropriate types of analytic tools that will present that information in ways that they can actually start making business decisions. You're not going to get that business decision, kind of capability truly out of most of the vendor systems. They'll present CSV files or Excel files, and they'll provide some charts in a dashboard and things like that. But you have to have experience in bringing these data elements together from a CLM environment and putting them together in a way that executives and other folks that are tasked with making decisions based on the information, putting it in a way that they can do that and refreshing it constantly so they can see week over week the changes that are occurring in their contract environment. And Power BI, by the way, is one of my favorites because we've got a link. We've got a connection between a number of CLM systems and Power BI with a number of configured dashboards in Power BI that will really assist companies in making decisions on the data in their CLM system.
Agreed. So I appreciate you sharing that. And what it sounds like, there's a big data science component missing from now you have all of this data available. How do you make it useful to the business where leaders can make decisions? The systems are more compliant, right? Operations is more compliant. You still feel like that's missing in this space?
I do. I feel, and again, I'm going to continue to go backwards in time just because I think it's useful. But the original CLM systems, the first three that were kind of brought onto the market, Jakarta, CMSI, and Nextdance, Those products were really good at specific things. But one thing that all three of them were pretty poor at was was expressing data in a way that a company could make decisions from. And so as CLM systems evolved over the years, they started focusing on things like intake processes, complicated, being able to create complicated approval and workflow processes, but they always left behind the actual management of data and the expression of data in easy ways, so that the executives and the other folks that were tasked with making decisions, that they could get to that information with, and so I still think that if you go through each of the vendors and ask, okay, if I needed to make these decisions, show me within the next 30 minutes how you would bring that data out of your system, none of them would be able to do that. And that's why doing things like, our group is doing right now, which is focusing on getting that information out of current CLM vendors and positioning it in tools like Power BI, using our experience of 400 different projects with 400 different clients and the data needs they had. We're bringing that all to bear, and that's keeping CLM relevant. When you can do that, CLM is absolutely relevant. It's absolutely not dead, because it's presenting data that people can make decisions from.
Awesome. I wish I had like a gavel to say CLM is not dead. Just So for leadership, the real bottleneck behind CLM implementations, Jim, do you see it as a technology issue? Is it processes? Is it user adoption? Or is it something deeper behind why we've seen this decline in the traction for CLM delivering value?
It's again, very good question, and I think it's multiple. It's multiple tiers, right? I think that I think vendors have pushed forward trying to bolt on so many cool things to their system that a lot of the systems have become overly complex. And getting away from the mission statement of CLM, which is repository, structured contracts, controlled standard language, and data, and so that becomes problematic, because if you do not have experienced, skilled CLM implementation teams, the implementation of the tool becomes overwhelming, and in many cases those implementations fail. In my younger days, I've had some failures. I've been the person that that thought that that I could just take this this really complicated tool with all these different things and put it together and drop it into a customer, and away they go. But that's not the way that it works. And so I think that the focus needs to be on the group of individuals within a business that are going to be using this tool and benefiting from it, getting them more highly involved and engaged from the start, and then working with them to understand the change that's occurring in their organization, identifying champions. That is a mandatory thing. If you're not identifying champions that are going to raise the flag and say, this is going to work and this is how we're going to make it work, and they continue to do that over the next 3 years, you're going to have struggles, and you're going to have implementation failures, and people are going to say, hey, I've tried this for 2 years, it doesn't work, goodbye. So I think change management, and I know people throw that word out, out all the time, but you truly need to understand how to deploy change management. And I think if focusing on that, all the tools are relatively similar in what they're going to be able to do for you. It's how you get a team ready to take advantage of some of that functionality. That's how you're going to win. The ROI comes from people. It doesn't come from the CLM system.
Agreed.
Is my perspective.
Agreed. So I heard a couple of things there, Jim. I heard one part is ownership, right? And I think one thing that we often see is when failures happen, and I think we're seeing them at a rate of 60% plus just in
Right.
the implementation, right? That's not even, to your point, over that 2 to 3 year period, does adoption really stick, right? I think then you start seeing it teeter off a little bit more. But ownership, when things fail, companies blame the vendor, they blame the implementation partner,
Right.
the implementation partner blames the company. So who do you believe should own the ownership in the success of CLM?
Well, and that's a tricky question. Because I mean, in my career, over all the projects that I have done, I think the ones that were the most successful were those that were managed by non-legal groups. And so I spent the first half of my CLM career focusing on buy side procurement solutions, supplier led solutions, and generally legal did not own that part or they did not own that CLM installation. They did not. The chief procurement officer owned it, or the procurement group owned it, and successes were more frequent then because that group had really specific needs. Now, legal was a part of it, of course, but and this is the interesting point. I can't tell you how many times I was asked to build a system that allowed us to, or allowed the customer to take away as much work from the legal team as they possibly could, because the way they looked at it is that legal is one of the resources that is most expensive in a company, right? So if you can create processes that minimize the number of times a contract has to go into legal, then you by definition are lowering the cost of contracting. And I was talking, and I've had long conversations with some of my friends in Fortune 10 companies, big communication companies that sell cell phones and stuff now, on how to lower the cost of contracting, and what groups can we focus on to pull the contract away unless absolutely necessary. And so, I think that when the ownership is within the group that is requiring the tool, they're requiring, they need the data to make decisions. They're the ones that are dealing with suppliers that have tariff issues, or they have supply chain issues. They're not allowed to pull the information. They're not allowed to bring data in, or units in from foreign countries, things like that. All of those things are focused in the buy side in these examples. And my buy side deployments, they generally run successful as long as you stand aside from the tool and you bring in the business. You find the champions, you do organizational readiness, you do communication, you do those things. But that's kind of what I found. And on the commercial side, sales operations is a group that would necessarily need to have CLM connected into their CRM environments. And again, legal becomes a more tangential group that's there to do specific things, which frees up legal to do the important things like mergers and acquisitions, and coming up with better contract structures and better language and things like that.
No, I definitely agree. And I would say that over time, especially when the pandemic happened, I think it's almost like clawing a cookie from a child to get CLM from legal teams now, because that has become like in legal operations, one of the most significant tools in their tech stack. And I wanted to see if you've seen that as well, where legal is playing a more dominant positioning in the design, configuration, and what the vision of CLM looks like for organizations.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that there are a lot of groups, that a lot of companies where the CLM system and the concept of bringing CLM into an organization is led by the legal group, and I guess it's an organizational thing at the higher level, at the larger companies. I tend to see CLM focused in the non-legal groups. As you come down in size, then just from my own personal experience, I see more legal groups getting involved in the ownership of the tool. And to be honest, I have been in a couple of engagements over the last 12 months where, because legal owned it and the procurement group and the commercial groups were fighting for some kind of control over the way the tool was going to be deployed and used, and how their people were going to be engaging with it, there was failure. There were large delays in getting started because there were infights between the procurement team and the legal team, or the commercial team and the legal team, in how the tool was actually officially going to be deployed. Also, from my perspective, legal, they do not have the time to deal with large enterprise level systems that have to be connected to other systems. I spend so many hours trying to explain how Salesforce is going to connect to a CLM system with legal groups. It's crazy, actually. So I see this as a personally as a problem. I see that CLM, its focus needs to be where the biggest problem is, where the biggest concern is. And I know legal people are going to be sending me chats now on LinkedIn saying, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about, and but I only talk from experience, right? I can tell you how many have failed. I can tell you, when legal has decided that it makes sense to more highly engage the group that's actually struggling, that success increases. The more you engage the people that are going to end up using the tool, instead of you trying to design it for them, the more success you're going to have, and the longer that success is going to last, allowing adoption to pick up. And so you're not replacing your CLM tool after 24 months and spending 1.5 to 1.75 times the original cost of the one you just bought.
Agreed. So, Agreed. Well, I'll apologize for you right now for all of the nasty grams you might get in terms of the comments, but I will tell you, I definitely agree with that. And I think it's an opportunity to really make contracts legal more central to the business, right? Because I think often it's kind of siloed, it sits to the side until something happens, and then they go to the legal team to get a contract done or to review the contract terms. But this is a way to really centralize that business unit as part of a critical function within the organization. But you mentioned change management being critical. And I think that this goes beyond just CLM. This is in any technology, right? Or even when you start talking about AI, if you don't have this foundational strategy of how you will have champions, how are you going to get adoption? How are you going to get utilization? All of this is for naught, right?
Right. No, it really is. Yeah. I think that, and this goes with any software system that's more than just a desktop application, right? I think that when you ask a group of resources to prepare themselves to adopt an ERP system, a new CRM system, a new CLM system. Those are major changes in an organization. And there are very specific change management processes that you can go through with a client if they're willing, that's going to make that change smoother. It's not going to be perfect, of course, but it's going to be better. And I've worked with some folks over the last few years that have really bought in to the idea of change management, and not just the concept of communication. And when you talk about change management with people, it's so funny to me, because the only thing they really think of is, oh yeah, we're gonna make sure we put out communications, periodically to the group that is going to use the tool. That's not change management. That's just good communication strategy, right? There are other pillars and key focus points on the change management journey that you should be taking. And this is where the identification of internal champions and super users becomes so critical as part of organizational readiness. Because if you want to truly get adoption, which then is going to drive ROI, you want to have a group of champions that are going to be there in the break room, listening to somebody complaining about the CLM tool and helping them understand, how to get around that issue, but also why it's so important to the corporation. And it can't just be the chief legal officer coming down and saying, you are going to do this, whether you like it or not. And, so I remember quick story. I remember doing a job in Cleveland, and I was there for 2 years, and we were getting ready to go live. And the company chose not to do a full-blown change management deployment along with the CLM system. There were a group of contract managers that had been there in this company for 35 plus years both. And these folks just absolutely refused to use the CLM system when it went live. They locked themselves in their office, literally, and refused to come to training classes, refused to become a part of the community that was adopting the CLM tool. So that's a failed change management model. When you have people locking themselves in their office, refusing to engage in what it is you're about to do. But that's an extreme case and an extreme story that goes to show, if you don't work on this, and spend a lot of time on it, you're going to have problems. This one company that I've worked with a couple years ago for 3-year implementation, multi-phase kind of approach, they bought into change management, and I think it really helped them be as successful as they are today. They still have struggles and they still have work to do, but every week we got together as a change management team and we went over the tools we were creating, how we were going to deploy organizational readiness, how we were going to find champions, how we were going to communicate, how we were going to train, how we were going to train long-term over the next 24 months, how we were going to train people that were hired after go live. All of that stuff is critical. And if you take it as seriously as the actual deployment itself, you're going to be successful. You're going to get value out of the CLM system, whether there's AI wrapped around it or not.
Agreed. No, I appreciate you said a lot there, and I appreciate, because that's all very valuable. And I think the champions are core. And I think sometimes there's an understanding of, let me just pick someone that could be the dedicated champion to push, or champions to push this throughout the organization, right? How important do you think it is for that person to possibly be a primary resistor to the implementation, like the person that's going to go inside and lock themselves in the office, right, and do how they've always done and not implement the system, or their ability to influence? Do you think that those are characteristics or features of a possible champion that leaders should be looking for to be part of their champion champion?
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you're asking this question because it is literally one of the key things that I advise is not only finding the rah champion, but finding the person that says that CLM system's a piece of crap and I don't want to have anything to do with it. Working with them and getting them more involved and getting them to really see and understand where the benefits are going to come from, how their team is going to benefit from this, working with those naysayers and detractors and turning them into champions. You've got a lifelong person that's going to carry your CLM flag all the way to the end.
Agreed.
Without a doubt. It's hard to do, but
Mhm.
I look for those people nowadays when I go into an enterprise deployment. I'm looking for not only those early adopters, those folks that are naturally tuned toward taking on new challenges and trying to make them successful, but I'm looking for the person that just puts up the brick wall and doesn't want to talk to anybody about this ever again.
Mhm.
And making them a champion as well.
One last question in this same area, and then I want to move on to AI. So, do you think champions should play a role in the design and configuration of the CLM tool as well, or should they just be used for the training and change management?
I think both is the answer, and it depends on when you're able to identify them. I think
Mhm.
the core team, and when you start a CLM implementation, the goal is for you to help an organization determine who their core team is going to be. Obviously a project manager. There'll be subject matter experts from either procurement or commercial sales or legal, and you should have a broad mixture of subject matter experts, people coming from privacy, people coming from finance, compliance, risk. These folks should engage in the upfront requirements, design, readiness, all of those areas. But the champions, if you can identify them early enough, that they could be part of the core team already, or once they're identified, start engaging them in these conversations. I think one of the things that companies sometimes fail to do is they try to make the core team really small, and sometimes they don't bring in those other groups that are going to have a say on how this environment is going to move forward and be successful, and they don't start to try and find their champions early and up front in the implementation process. Sure, there's going to be a couple of champions already, and so if an example would be I'm the GC, and I know that the person that works for me is going to be a champion because I've told her she's going to be a champion, right? So she's there in the early stages, or he's there in the early stages of the process. But to me, the champions need to come from the group. Like for this large communication company I worked with, they had 300 contract managers in the procurement group, and from that group came the 4 key champions. And we went through the process of identifying the profile of a champion. We went through identifying which folks in the group would be a champion, but we had already started design and requirements work. So they came in a bit later, but at least they were part of that team from that point forward. And it really is important that you choose these folks before user acceptance testing. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the system that's going to be released to your audience is really finalized. And you want your champions there to help your team get through UAT.
Agreed. No, I appreciate you sharing that. So I want to jump to the big topic around AI, Gen AI, and large language models, right? Everyone's talking about, okay, and agents, right? I think that there's a lot of different components being added to the CLM space. I wanted to get your thoughts on these additions, right? On top of CLM, are there limitations, or do you think that this will unlock a value in CLM that hasn't been as of today?
I think both. I think
Mhm.
that I think AI brings, AI machine learning, however you want to kind of, define it. But there are benefits that those tools are bringing to the table. Now, one of the problems is that the order of magnitude in terms of capability differs significantly across vendors and across non-vendor AI providers. People who don't have a CLM system but are providing AI ability, especially in terms of reading legacy information or processing legacy data. I think large language models, they're still evolving, right? So you're taking tools from a evolving capability in terms of large language models, and plugging it into functionality that's also evolving in the CLM tool. And so now, there are some interesting things that are happening, but there's also going to be gaps, right? And so I don't, large language models and the fact that they can look at a document and come back with examples versus your clause library or your playbook and say you should be doing this, or this clause failed, in terms of reading third-party language. That's great, and it's helpful without a doubt. But it is absolutely not replacing the contract manager and the procurement group, nor is it replacing the legal attorney in the legal department, who still has to review what the large language model has extracted. And I don't think we're at a place yet where you can let the LLMs make a decision and put that into a contract, have it signed by your CEO, and feel very comfortable about it, right? I just don't think we're there quite yet. I think that agents are interesting. I worked with a number of folks about 5 years ago to come up with agents to solve very specific problems that we found in CLM environments. But I don't see a situation at this point in time where agents are going to replace CLM systems. I don't think you're going to have 5, 6, 7 different agents that are focused on doing specific things take over for what CLM systems can actually provide. I believe that I believe they can be married, and I believe that they're sophisticated enough today. So if I enter the CLM system and an agent says, Jim, what is it that you would like to do? Here are the 3 things you left off on the last time you were here. This is the most important one. That kind of an interaction is useful. Having an agent that helps me from the request point to the next point I go to get the information I need, that's a helpful agent. But it's built around the CLM infrastructure, not replacing it from my perspective, at least.
No, totally agreed. And to be honest with you, looking at the data side of things, I think agents can do a lot, and these large language models will be able to do a lot with the data. But I don't think that we've really shifted to that space. But I think that as the procurement and the commercial teams grow in their utilization of, or finance departments grow in their utilization of these agent tools with those data sets, I think that the contract data could be very beneficial and leveraged on that side of things.
No, I agree. I agree. I think one of the things I'd love to see is, people that are doing presentations of CLM systems with AI embedded get away from the, yes, and you can search for a force majeure clause and find pandemic, language in it, or you can look for all force majeure clauses that don't have pandemic in it, So the rudimentary kind of examples that are given from sales teams at the vendor side of the equation, they need to start to evolve to show a lot more depth around what an AI system can do, especially agents, in terms of extracting data and providing knowledge around that data. Getting away from the indemnity clauses and force majeure clauses, that just, you need to start training sales teams to evolve beyond that point, right? But no, I totally agree with you that the data area, it's always comes down to data, right? I mean, at the end of the day, all of this is just wonderful conversation, but it's data. And if you're not telling your service provider that data is one of your most critical parts of the process, then I'm not sure you're going to have as successful a journey as you hope for.
Agreed, agreed. I think that this is a perfect way to kind of segue into our landing. So, for executive leaders, what would you say are critical success factors that they must demand in their CLM implementations and systems?
I think they need to demand that the people that are going to be helping their team through this journey have depth of experience. They're not folks that have just done 2 implementations or 3 implementations, and they're here to design your system of the future, for contracting. I think that's item number one. I think that that they need to demand from their vendor or from their service provider proof that they understand how AI is going to play a part in their ongoing journey, or if it even is. It may not be the right choice for them to start looking at AI until release 2, 3, or 4 down the road. So I think kind of making sure there's experience, in the folks that are leading readiness and design, and change management. If you're not demanding change management and you're not asking for more than just email communications going out on a periodic structured basis, that's what you should be demanding. So I would go with those points.
So I would then ask you, what do you think the next generation of CLM looks like, right? Because it does definitely seem like we're in a down slope, but you're saying the market is evolving. What do you think that these future tools, capabilities, what do they embody?
They need to embody connection. Connection is everything from what I see and what I've seen for years. And it's so hard right now to integrate a CLM into other systems that that the focus on connection, I think, is even more important than releasing these very sophisticated AI legal agents that create playbooks on the fly and do all kinds of wonderful stuff like that. But if you're not connecting CLM tightly into environments that already exist, and sharing data, then that's just a major dropped ball. So I think that from my perspective is one of the keys.
Agreed. I think that that's definitely the target, right? And I hope to see some solutions get there soon. But I want to thank you so much, Jim, for your insights today. It's been very, very valuable. I always enjoy having conversations with you because you are such a wealth of knowledge in this space. Are there any final thoughts that you would like to share with our listeners today, or?
Don't be afraid of CLM. CLM is a wonderful platform if deployed correctly, and I'll leave it at that, because it is not a dying environment or a dying system.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jim.
All right, thanks a lot.
So, as you think about today's conversation with Jim, here's a final question for executives. If CLM isn't delivering strategic value, if it's just compliance and chaos, Why are you still investing in the same approach? Now, imagine your contract ecosystem is intelligent, it's dynamic, and it's deeply connected to the data that drives your business. What could you unlock that's impossible today? That's where the future of contract value lives, and it starts with asking better questions. So I want to thank you again for your time today. Ask you to hit like or subscribe so you don't miss what's coming up next. And share this episode with at least 3 other leaders so that they can rethink their CLM strategy. This episode is sponsored by Contract IQ, who's redefining contract intelligence, leveraging AI. I'm your host, Taija Dickerson, and you've been listening to the 10X Contract Value Podcast, cutting edge insights where we don't just manage contracts, we master them. See you soon.